job after residency. So I went to medical school at Temple in Philadelphia. It was a medical school that I loved, where you just get the most incredible clinical training and education because the faculty there are very, very focused on educating medical students. And so just sort of as you're starting your journey, I really encourage you to sort of really dig into, what the culture is like at any medical school that you're considering. I then went on to do my emergency medicine residency at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, which is the hospital that the show ER is based on. And that as well was just a phenomenal experience where I got the best clinical training working in an inner city environment for emergency medicine. There was really nothing better than that. And then I went on to the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, where I was on the emergency medicine faculty. So not Columbia. Columbia is like on the opposite side of town, but they're sort of all the same. Anyway, and at Sinai at Icahn, I worked in the emergency department there. I also did some shifts at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, which is affiliated with Sinai for those of you who are interested in attending medical school there. And while I was at Icahn, I was involved on the medical school admissions committee. I was involved in the residency leadership and, interviewing and assessing our residency applicants for emergency medicine. I was involved in curriculum design at the medical school. So I did a whole bunch of things there, as anybody in academic medicine does.
Dr. Jessica, I think you got muted.
There we go. Okay, sorry. And then when I at one point I sort of decided that it was time for me to sort of move on from Sinai, and I was thinking about what to do, and I founded MedEdits because one of the main things that I loved about my work at MedEdits was working with students. So I left Icahn, I founded MedEdits, I started working in the community. And that's one of the beauties of clinical medicine and, emergency medicine in particular, is that there's so many different practice settings. I don't know if that's to me or to you, Ahmad, but the link or the message in the chat. Anyway, and so I started doing shifts in the community, and at the same time founded MedEdits, and MedEdits has just continued to grow over the past 16 plus years. And now I have a team of faculty who work with me as well. And we really structure ourselves around an academic medical department, because fundamentally, above all else, I am an academic physician. And that sort of is, kind of how I identify, so to speak, from a professional standpoint. I don't think of myself as someone in business, even though I have a business. So I really would like to start this session. I mean, this is all just going to be Q&A, and then I am also, happy to share my screen, which I think I have the opportunity to do here. Do I have? Oh yeah, I do. Okay, great. I see the share. So first of all, I just, because I know this is a really a huge audience, and I'm so impressed that Ahmad has created this for everybody. I think it's a phenomenal resource for all of you, and that this has been going on for several years, I think is a real testament to the work that Ahmad and everyone who is who's working to make this happen. I think it's incredible that there are nearly 200 of you, so that's just amazing for MedStem to create this for everybody. So initially, I just want to find out from everyone where everyone is from, where you are in the process, because in terms of getting into medical school, the process is going to be very, very different depending on whether you are a U.S. citizen, whether you are international and you are not a U.S. citizen, you are someone who is international and you're doing your studies internationally, and whether or not you are an international and you are doing your studies here in the U.S. And those are sort of like the three main buckets that I would put everybody into. And so, my focus is really US based schools. Of course, we do also, help students who are interested in offshore medical schools, like Caribbean medical schools. So for example, I see, someone who's in Egypt, a high school student, someone who's in Nigeria, in high school, Egypt, 11th grade, Ukraine, high school. So Dallas, senior year of undergrad, Puerto Rico, freshman college. Okay, so I am seeing Algeria, Egypt. So all right, so what I'm going to say, and there definitely are a lot of students here who are international. So what I'm going to do, so wait, hold on, there was someone, Barbados, and I'm an undergrad at Penn. Okay, so that's also a very different category too. So what I'm going to do here, and this is what I figured it would be a very, kind of diverse group of students from diverse backgrounds. And then I also know that we have some students who are US based and are US citizens at the same time. So Dina has a question. Let me just see. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? The first thing that I'm going to do is I want to show everybody, and I need to log back in. So just give me a little, just be patient with me here because it logged me out. I had it all ready to go. I want to log into the MSAR for everybody because the MSAR is where you are going to be able to get a ton of data to understand sort of the competitive landscape for someone who is international. So I'm first going to sort of focus on the international students because the process is going to be very, very different. And it's if you're interested in going to a US medical school, the process is going to be very different. And it's also going to be extremely competitive if you are an international student. Now, the first thing that I want to make sure everybody knows, and I see we have a ton of people here from Egypt. That's just incredible. If you are an international student, the key thing is that US-based medical schools want you to have all of your undergraduate coursework done at a US-based institution. So step one for any student who is international, and I see we have a lot of high school students here, so that's great. You're starting early. Step one for any international high school student who is just starting out is when you are considering what college to go to, it is absolutely vital that you go to it's absolutely vital that you go to college here in the United States, okay? Because the medical schools are only going to consider coursework that is done here in the United States. Now, if that is not an option for you, and I'm going to get to the MSAR in a second, I know there are questions about that because I mentioned it. If going to college here in the United States for whatever reason is not an option for you, then you would be best positioned, honestly, to go to medical school internationally, and then you try to get a residency here in the United States. Okay. And I don't want to sort of start getting into the residency match process because that's an entirely different process. And we're really focused on medical school here. But if your ultimate goal is to practice here in the US, there are several pathways of how to do that. And actually, there are more states, in fact, and this is, sort of very current and, up and coming. But because of the physician shortage here in the United States, there are many states that are now allowing internationally trained physicians to come to the United States and to practice in the United States without having done residency here. And I anticipate that because of the doctor shortage, that type of practice, that type of those types of laws, I think that those things are going to be instituted in more states in the US. So a lot of things to think about if you are an international student. So the MSAR, okay, which is the medical school admissions requirements. And again, if you're in high school, you know, we're getting this is usually people are accessing the MSAR when they're in college, right? When they're starting to think about where they want to attend medical school. But if you are international and you are thinking about going to med school here in the US, for some reason I'm not able to put the MSAR in the chat. I'm not sure why. Oh, direct message. I don't want a direct message. Hold
I
on.
looked it up. Is it from the AAMC, like that
Yes, there
website?
it is. I got it in there. So if you go to that landing page that I just put in the chat, that is the MSAR. All right. So anyone who is interested in attending medical school here in the United States, I really encourage you to get access to the MSAR. And I'm going to show you why. I'm going to share my screen because there is a ton of information on the MSAR. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to walk you through some of this. Okay, I think everyone can see my screen, right? Okay, so this is the MSAR. This is how it looks when you go to the initial landing page. You will have every allopathic medical school in the United States that is listed here. There is so much data in the MSAR that you really have to spend some time with it to to really kind of understand how to navigate it and to really be able to dig into the data. All right, but let's focus right now on international students. You can see on the left hand side here that this is you can filter out, right, which medical schools accept different types of students. Now the first thing is if you are a United States resident. All right, so if you live here and you're a resident, you're a citizen of the United States, there are going to be some state schools that are either do not accept any out-of-state applicants or they accept very, very few. Okay, so if you are a US resident, you're going to want to pay attention to this, which schools accept out-of-state residents. Now, the way that MSAR and the way that US medical schools divvy this up is Canadian and international applicants are different. I don't think we have any Canadians in the audience based on what I saw, but we do have a lot of internationals. So I'm going to click on internationals and you are going to see, okay, how that knocked out so many schools, right? How many schools take international students. It's not many, okay? And most of the medical schools that accept international students are really your top tier, most competitive schools. Okay. So they're only 5 pages worth of schools. So you have Perelman, you have NYU, Northwestern, in Canada, that's a whole separate application system. Johns Hopkins, so Icon. So the most competitive medical schools are the ones that tend to consider the most international students. Okay, so like now I'm just going to click on a medical school. I don't know if anyone has any preferences. All right, let's click on Hopkins, okay, just so I can kind of walk you through this data. And so this way, when you get access to the MSAR, you know how to do this. So accepts out-of-state students, right? Hopkins is a private medical school. Private medical schools can accept anybody they want. They accept Canadians, they accept internationals. And this is because private medical schools are not state funded, right? So they can take whomever they want. These are your median data points, okay? Median MCAT, median GPA. So the international students whom we work with who are successful in this process, I can tell you are extremely high achieving students. Okay. They are very, very competitive, both in terms of their metrics, so in terms of their MCAT and their GPA, and in terms of their experiences, their experience profile. So if we take a look at this, okay, and I'm going to scroll down here just so I can sort of show you, kind of where the real data is that you want to be considering. Now, this is actually, I'm just going to pause here for a minute because this is really, really important. Now, something that we are hearing a lot about from the pre-medical audiences right now is that everybody has to have paid clinical work to get into medical school. And I think this is a trend. I don't know sort of where this idea is starting from and why it's propagating. I'm doing my best to dispel this, and that's something I'm really going to be pushing towards over the next, year or so, because I just think that it's making pre-medical students absolutely bananas because they all think that they need to get paid clinical work experience in order to get into medical school. And so here is Hopkins, and Hopkins breaks this down on the pre-medical experiences of the first year class. Now, every single school in MSAR does this. Okay, so Hopkins is not the only one. Now, when people say, is research, must you have research to get into medical school? And our answer is always yes, you absolutely must have research experience to get into medical school. And again, I don't know where these rumors are being initiated, but there are, I hear from people that you don't, I'm hearing you don't have to have research to get into medical school, but you do have to have paid clinical work experience. To us, it's the exact opposite. Okay, if you want to be competitive for a US allopathic means MD granting medical school, you must have research. You don't necessarily need to have paid clinical work experience. Okay, so, and this proves that, right? So 100% of Hopkins students had research, 100%. Last year, this is the most recent data, right? 52% had paid clinical work experience. Now you can see this is creeping up. And the reason this is creeping up, I think there are many, many reasons. First of all, more and more students are taking gap years after college. It simply becomes necessary for a lot of students because it's impossible, frankly, to get in all the prerequisites and to really, be competitive for medical school in 3 years if you end up applying at the end of your junior year of college. But, I think it's creeping up for that reason because more and more students are taking gap years, and during those gap years, they are working clinically. But I also think this is because students are hearing that they have to have paid clinical work experience in order to get into medical school. Okay, so I think that there are several factors at play why this keeps creeping up. Now, 89%, and you can see this number is very similar, right? Every single year for the past 4 years, 89% had medical, clinical, community service, or volunteer work. Now, that is what is important. And I'm trying to change how students think of this, how applicants think of this. You need patient-facing experience, whether that comes in the form of research, doing clinical research, whether that comes in the form of clinical or medical related volunteer work. It doesn't have to be paid work, okay? So I'm really, really, really trying to emphasize that, all right? Because I just think that there are all these pre-medical students and their parents, or parents who are involved, and they are feeling like they have to get, they have to get this paid work experience, otherwise they have no shot. And that just simply isn't the case, all right? Physician shadowing, still a must. Absolutely. You don't need excessive hours, however. Okay, I recently wrote a blog post on how many hours of clinical shadowing we recommend. I sort of, the rule that we sort of, as a very, very general guide, is the 75-1-3 rule. That's 75 hours of clinical shadowing. Shadow 1, primary care physician, that's internal medicine, pediatrics, or family medicine, and then shadow 3, specialists. Again, a very general rule that can be modified slightly depending on what your other clinical exposures are, all right? And then community service, you must have it. You have to be involved in your community as a pre-medical student. Okay, so to us, all of these things, research, clinical or medical volunteer service, physician shadowing, community service, these are requirements to get into medical school. We do not consider paid clinical work a requirement to get into medical school. All right. So again, if you can all help to dispel that myth, that would be great. Because it's, again, I feel there's so much anxiety with pre-med students thinking that they have to get paid clinical work. Okay. Now let's get down to the data that I really want all of you to look at. All right. And I'm looking at this primarily for the international students. Now, even though you can filter information based on Canadians, US students, and internationals, once you actually look at the matriculation data for the first year class for for each of these schools, and every school is listed, they don't break it down, okay, into Canadians. They only break it down into in-state, out-of-state, international, and total. So look at these international numbers and you'll see what I'm talking about. They got 369 international verified applications. Okay. Out of that, they only interviewed 18 students. So let's just let me just go on to my calculator. I always like to sort of do working sessions with people, just because I think it's important to sort of go through this data. So that is a 4.9% interview rate. Okay. So less than 5% of international applicants to Hopkins are interviewed. Okay. And so you understand how very competitive this is. All right. Now, they don't tell you how many are actually accepted. All right. 2 matriculated. So it's possible that more than 2 were accepted, but 2 out of 369 international students were accepted. Okay. So I think that this is really important to understand as you are, starting to think about, if you're an international student, as you're starting to think about, where you want to go to college and just how competitive you need to be to get into medical school in this country. It's just really, really important to be aware of the data when you're so young and you're just starting out. Okay. Now, it's very possible that you might say, you know what? I think a better bet for me is if I go to college, not necessarily in the United States. I go to medical school, not necessarily in the United States. And then I try to do my residency training in the United States. And, we certainly work with many international medical graduates. Is it tougher to get a residency position here in the United States if you are from an international medical school? Absolutely. It is more difficult to do that if you are international, but it's not impossible. So I just want you to sort of be informed. As you're kind of, again, sort of just starting out on this journey and you're trying to, make decisions in terms of what to do. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm happy to
Yeah.
answer any questions that you have. And Ahmad, I don't know if you want to
Yes.
sort of run that
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's totally up to you.
I'll host it so it's easy for you. But great. I loved learning about that. MASR, correct?
Yes, MSAR, the
Never knew that.
MSAR, and it's the medical school admissions requirements. Okay.
Yeah.
The abbreviation is MSAR, the mnemonic, and it's through
Perfect.
the AAMC. And I think it's like a $36 cost, like for a 2-year subscription or something like that. There's just
Amazing.
a wealth of information in there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the questions we received in the chat is, what about international students that have US citizenship? What would they be considered as?
Oh, they're US citizens. They just don't, if they have US citizenship, they're US citizens. They just don't necessarily have a state residency, right? So they won't, sort of have that benefit of being able to apply to their state schools. So most state schools, in fact, all state schools offer varying degrees of preference for their in-state applicants because that's where they're getting their funding from. So that's something really important to pay attention to. Sometimes when we work with students, they're looking at internationals. I mean, they're looking at state schools, let's say, that have, really low MCATs. And they're like, oh, I can get into this state school because their MCAT's a 507, and that's the same as mine, but it's a state school that doesn't accept any out-of-state applicants. So, but yes, if they're US citizens, they can apply as US citizens. Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you. Another question from the chat. I'll take chat questions before I take hand questions just because there were a ton and I want to make sure we get through
Yeah.
everyone. How can we get engaged in clinical experiences, and what are the most useful types of experiences that aren't paid?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I do plan on again, as I said, when I was going over the MSAR data, I just find there's so much misinformation out there right now with regards to the best way to get what I call patient-facing experience. And so I sort of want to change the narrative a little bit on how people think of that. Don't think of it in terms of clinical experience. Think of it in terms of patient-facing experience. And the best way to get that is to look for volunteer opportunities. So, that can be volunteering in hospice, that can be volunteering in a nursing home, that can be volunteering in a free clinic, anything that is going to put you in a position to be interacting with patients and to be observing patient care. And that doesn't even necessarily have to be like, going to the operating room or something like that. Understanding how a front office works, all of these types of things, understanding, how, the bureaucracy in medicine, or how to, navigate insurance companies, anything that's going to give you insight into how medicine is practiced is what is valuable, right? So understanding, let's say, like, office operations and the interaction between, the front office staff, the nurses, the doctors, the patients, understanding all of these inner workings, that's what's most important. And then also, like, finding something and then getting deeply involved in it, right? So medical schools now are paying a lot of attention to how they always have, but even more so now. They're paying a lot of attention to how many hours students have engaged in activities, right? So what is the longevity of your involvement in an experience? And sometimes you have to go through a few experiences, right, to find the one where you're going to be able to, really commit a ton of your time and where you could potentially really make an impact. And so be patient sometimes in finding the right experience that might be the best for you and that might offer the most opportunity for you. So, offer to help, offer, sort of where you see a need, like, come up with a new initiative, figure out how you can make the most impact, how you can get the most involved, and what's going to be fulfilling to you.
Amazing. So you're saying, if, for instance, I was a caregiver, for example, it would be better if I was a volunteer caregiver instead of a paid caregiver?
Not necessarily. I mean, if you're getting paid, amazing, right? I'm just saying you don't have to be paid. That's all. So being a volunteer caregiver, I mean, being a paid caregiver, that's phenomenal, right? You are, you're really getting to know this patient. You're understanding, the minute to minute needs of this patient. So there's tremendous value in that. So I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than the other. I'm just saying I don't want students to be stressed out thinking they have to get paid.
Makes sense. Amazing. The next question I'll do is, how do students get involved in research, and what is meaningful research in your opinion?
Okay, great. So research can be in anything. All right. It can be in the basic sciences. It can be clinical research, where you're interviewing patients, and, it can be clinical trials research. It can be anything. The best, first of all, when you get involved in research, and this, and again, a lot of the students here are in high school. So we're so many steps ahead. And I sometimes when people talk to me, they leave and it's stressful, right? Because it's so much information. And what's important is to realize this is happening over years. Okay. So don't feel like you need to get all this done tomorrow. You put it sort of in the memory bank, you write it down, you keep it in mind. when you're looking for research, or when you're looking, frankly, for any experience, you also want to keep in mind, what are your interests, right? So you don't just want to get any research experience just to sort of put it on the application. Then it becomes, then you start having more of a, kind of what I call like a checkbox type of candidacy. You really want to figure out, where are my interests? Now, sometimes your interests are going to evolve and develop based on the experiences and the opportunities that you have, right? So sometimes you're going to get involved in an opportunity, like a research opportunity, because it's a research opportunity that you could find, right? And sometimes students, you don't have access to a ton of things, so you have to get involved in the thing that is available to you to get involved with. So the best way to get involved in research is either, if you're an undergraduate student, you want to potentially reach out to your professors. You want to reach out to labs. Sometimes you literally have to send 100 emails to different people. And something that we've been thinking of here at MedEdits is to come up with some templates. And I'm writing that down so I don't forget. Come up with templates and things, for students, to send out sort of these feeler emails. Is there, do you have any opportunities for a pre-medical student to get involved in your research? And sometimes students literally have to send out hundreds of emails. I mean, we're working with high school B.S. M.D. students who literally, we have one student who I think got sent out like 150 emails, got a phenomenal opportunity, but it took a lot of emailing to get that opportunity. So you want to reach out to professors at your own undergraduate college. Certainly that's number one. And then, there's so much remote work at this point. So you also can reach out to people that maybe aren't local to you. And maybe you could, let's say, spend a summer with that person and then continue doing, work with them remotely during the school year. If you live in an urban area. So for example, Ahmad, if you live in Austin, Texas, you go to school in Austin, Texas, go to the major medical centers there, find local medical schools. I mean, Ahmad and I were talking about Houston before this started. Houston is the largest medical center in the world. So like, if you go to school, at UT, University of Houston, or if you go to Rice, or if you go to any of these Houston-based schools, you have a wealth of hospitals. You can reach out to any of those people who are doing research in your area of interest and ask if they'd be willing to take on, a student, on a volunteer or paid position. I mean, some students have to get paid, right? I mean, finances are a big issue for a lot of people, and, everyone's going to respect that. But, reach out to people directly. And then if you can find something in an area of interest that you've already established, that's terrific. But maybe you're just starting out. You don't even know what your area of interest is, right? So sometimes in that case, whatever you do becomes your area of interest. And then you build on that. You build on that through your research. You build on that through your clinical exposure. You build on that through your community service. So then there sort of becomes some themes in your application, and you sort of develop an expertise in something, and you become, you sort of really create that niche for yourself.
Perfect. I know we have a ton of hands raised, so I promise we'll get to those in a second. I want to make sure we get through all the direct messages that came in before that. I a question I was seeing is, like, I know we talked about clinical experience a couple minutes ago, and the paid versus unpaid, but some clinical experiences I've seen, I know a lot of students, as they like try and gain this clinical experience, like for instance, phlebotomy, like it's an amazing way to get involved, but some medical schools, like for instance at UNT Health Science Center, they don't accept that as clinical work. Do you think those are still valuable experiences to have?
Who doesn't accept that as clinical work?
It's a UNT, it's the University of North Texas Health Science, HSC. Like they don't, yes, I think it's a Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine program, but they don't accept it as, and I don't know if that's a trend, that there's certain types of clinical experience that are more important, like being a caregiver or like working as a medical assistant. But yeah,
It's
that was really
interesting.
surprising. Yeah.
I'll have to look that up because I'm not aware of that. I consider phlebotomy a phenomenal way to get clinical experience, honestly. And we have one student who did so much phlebotomy, and had a phenomenal process, did really, really well. And so I will have to look up this UNT specific, criteria. I also, the way the medical school application looks, right, is, the way that you write about an experience is what matters, right? So if you're doing phlebotomy, or like, let's say you're a pharmacy tech, another way to sort of get what I call patient-facing experience, it's also about how you write about the experience, what you've gained from the experience, what insights you've, garnered through that work. So when you're doing phlebotomy, depending on, where you're working, are you working, at one place? Are you working in the hospital and, going from room to room? What kind of exposure are you getting? What are you learning about the patients? What are you learning about the patient experience? What are you learning about different specialties in medicine? So phlebotomy is the type of thing where you can learn about a ton of different specialties in medicine. So I think that actually offers wonderful, sort of insight into clinical practice in a way that, let's say, working in a single practice setting might not. So in terms of this being like a UNT specific thing, that they don't consider that clinical experience, I'm going to look into that, honestly, Ahmad, because that's a little bizarre to me. In schools also, they don't break this down in the same way that students do sometimes, right? So it has more to do with, like, have you put yourself in a clinical arena, and what did you gain from that experience? What insights did you gain from the experience? How did it inform your understanding of medicine and medical practice? Right? But
Thank
that's
you.
interesting.
Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
look that up.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll go to a hand now. Dina?
Hi, doctor. First of all, it's a pleasure listening to you. It was so helpful. Thank you. Second, I wanted to ask you, since you said that going to medical school, it's better to go to a college in the US, since I'm an international school. So I actually wanted to ask, what about high school? Does it like
Mm.
affect if it wasn't high school in the US for going to college for a scholarship, or it doesn't affect it? Thank
Yeah.
you.
That, I mean, I'm not a college expert in the same way I'm a medical school expert. I know a lot about college admissions. However, um, getting into college internationally is going to be more difficult. But it also, of course, depends on where you want to go to college. Now, I know we certainly work with a number of students who, are international students, but they went to boarding school here in the US, right? So they apply to boarding schools here in the US. And that sort of, I would say, probably positions them better to get into a US based undergraduate college. And I can also tell you that those international students who go to US boarding schools are incredibly driven and focused people. We also, there also are a lot of students who go to international schools, abroad, but, and those students are also, I feel like, positioned, groomed, however you want to think of it, um, differently than students who just go to a regular international school, to get into US undergraduate colleges. So yeah, I think that probably makes it a little bit, I don't want to say easier, because nothing's easy. But I think it positions you perhaps a little bit better, just because a US based school, US based high school, or an international school that, is used to having students who are aiming to go to US universities, they just know the process better, right? They're educating you differently. They're preparing you for the SAT, the ACT. They understand the college admissions process in this country. So if that's an option, I would say that probably puts you in a better position to get into an undergraduate college here in the US. Yes. As you all know, probably, undergraduate college admissions is, it's gotten nutty here in the United
Yeah,
States. Yeah.
it definitely has. To add on to Dina's point, I have some people in the chat asking if having an IB diploma affects college acceptances in the US. Actually was an IB diploma candidate and I received a diploma, but I don't know how that would affect an international student applying.
Yeah, great question. So the key to college admissions is to be taking the most rigorous curriculum that is available at your high school. So if the most rigorous curriculum at your high school is getting an IB diploma, being in IB classes, being on that track, yes, that is going to help, right? If your school has AP classes, taking those AP classes and being at the highest level of rigor, all of that, that's what helps. So if you are aiming to get into the most selective US-based undergraduate institutions in the US, you need to be taking whatever the highest rigor at your high school is, whatever that is. And that's going to vary. And that's also important to understand because, like, for example, there are many private schools here in the US that are moving away from APs, that don't have APs anymore. So those students are not expected to have APs. They're not expected to go use their summers to take AP classes or to take AP exams, right? So it's about being at, the highest level of whatever is part of your community, your high school.
Great, thank you. I see some questions in the chat, and one question that actually stood out to me is, I know around the world, some people don't have access to a research lab. We have some people here joining in from war-driven countries where they want to participate in these activities, but they can't because their country's at war. So would research papers from like organizations like, like we hold like a research symposium where people can do research and present their symposium, and it's a pretty cool opportunity. Would those count as research experience in your opinion?
They do. It's really about, it's really about how you spin it. um, and there are so many right now, varying, there's so many for-profit, pay us and we will, connect you with a mentor and you will do a research paper and you will publish and, and this is going to help your college chances. Does some of those things work? Probably. Are they really, really variable? Yeah, they're really variable. I mean, I can tell you, my daughter did one of these during COVID, and it was terrible. I mean, it was a waste of her time. It was a waste of our money. So I think that it really depends on the mentor you get. And that obviously is not predictable. So I'm hesitant, honestly. I think there are ways, like, so for example, what we did. So I'm just giving you my own experience. We did one of these programs, and again, it was just a complete waste. And so what she ended up doing was, within her area of interest, she ended up going to LinkedIn and she found somebody who was doing research in that area of interest and connected with that person and asked that person to mentor her. And that ended up being a much more valuable experience for her than this paid program. So I think that there are different ways to do this. I would be wary of these paid programs, honestly. And then in terms of like getting publications and getting, research opportunities, those are a dime a dozen at this point. And if you go online and you do a deep dive and you find places to publish and to present your own research, you can find those. You don't need someone to do that for you. And pre-meds are all ambitious students, and you can find that on your own. So I wouldn't be paying someone thousands of dollars to do this for you when it's something you really can do yourself.
Amazing answer. Amir, your hand is raised.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear
Yeah,
me?
we can hear you. It's a little muffled, but we'll try our best to comprehend.
Oh, so thank you so much for this session. It was great. And I wanted to ask you if you can please explain how international students, particularly those from North Africa or like in those areas are evaluated based on their grading system compared to the USA grading system because they are so different.
So I think Amir was asking about the grading system. So where he's from, the grading system isn't on like a 3.0, 4.0 scale and how that transcribes into applying to schools. Because I know like there's different grading systems across the world and not everyone's goes by 3.0, 4.0. So how does that work?
The colleges know this. They know this, and I assume this is a high school student, right, who's applying to colleges. Right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
I'm
okay. Okay,
I
wonderful.
finished.
Yeah. So the way the colleges work is, and the medical schools don't work this way. Okay. The medical schools, it's faculty. We volunteer our time to be on the admissions committee, but the colleges are different. The colleges have an army, depending on how big the college is, an army of admissions officers, okay, who are paid. And so there is going to be someone who is assigned to your region, all right, who understands the grading system in your region. And so they're going to be able to interpret those grades. The colleges are completely accustomed to all of the various grading systems, of which there are so many. So that is not a worry. They will know how to convert those, and they will know how to interpret those. Now, it's obviously, let's say, going to be easier from a country where there's a much larger sample size, so to speak, so where there have been many more applicants, let's say from your undergrad, sorry, I'm getting my phases mixed up, from your high school. They are going to hopefully there's some history there from your high school, because college admissions officers, they change over all the time. And what the previous college admissions officer, let's say for your region, learned about your high school and your grading system, they then pass on to the person who's taking over their position.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
The next question can be from Hems.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to say, first of all, your talk was lovely. It was really nice hearing from you. And I wanted to ask for international students with who want access to scholarships because colleges in America can be quite expensive. Where can one find these resources for medical school specifically?
For medical school, it's going to be difficult. Of course, there are military scholarships. It's usually the medical schools themselves that are going to be offering those scholarships after you are applying. They're usually going to be merit-based scholarships. They also offer very, very generous financial aid. So there sort of isn't necessarily a database that I'm aware of where you can find scholarship information for medical school, but it's usually coming from the individual medical schools themselves, those are usually going to be extended with your acceptance offer.
Okay, thank you. And just another question. If I'm already in a year one medical school student, for example, internationally, and I wish to transfer to continue my education, not start from the beginning. Like I just want to continue my medical education, but somewhere in the United States. Is this possible or would it have different procedure?
I don't want to discourage you, but that is nearly impossible. This is our advice for US students too. First of all, the US medical schools are going to want all your education to be here in the US. That's number one. And number two, if a position opens up based on attrition, that's almost something where you have to be in the right place at the right time, really. Then this is what we tell our US students too. It is extremely, extremely difficult to transfer medical schools.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's because the class sizes are just so tiny, right? It's not like college.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mustafa.
So first of all, I want to thank you for this great speech. It was really great experience from you. And secondly, I want to ask, is there any requirements for getting into residency in the US?
What was the question, Ahmad? Can you repeat
Can
it?
you repeat, Mustafa? We could not hear you.
Is there any requirements for getting into residency in the US?
Re- oh, I think you're talking more about the residency process in the US, like if he completes university
Yeah,
or
yeah. Is there
Okay.
any requirements for getting into the residency?
So if you complete medical school in your country and then you want to come here for residency, yes. Okay, that's a whole other that requires a whole other talk. Okay, but the bottom line is when you are applying for residency here in the US, and many international students do, many international medical graduates do, the key thing is going to be to come to the US either during medical school or after medical school, and to try to get, basically to get, sort of your feet on this soil, and to potentially to do research here, to get some clinical exposure here, to get some US letters of recommendation, and then you will apply for residency. You also need to take the USMLE steps 1 and steps 2. So, in order to be able to apply for residency. So that's something that if you want to be eligible to apply for residency here in the US, this is something that you should be sort of working into your medical school curriculum in your country, because it's going to be more difficult, I think, to, even though people do it, to take those USMLE, United States Medical Licensing exams. It's going to be much more difficult to be taking those exams after you're done with medical school, when that information is several years behind you. Keep in mind that the USMLE step 1 is now a pass-fail test. So it is definitely an easier test. It used to be a quantitative 3-digit score. It's now pass-fail. So I certainly recommend that if this is something that you're considering doing, that you take that test. And then the USMLE step 2 is still a quantitative 3-digit test, a 3-digit score. So you want to do as well as you possibly can on that exam, because residency programs used to use the USMLE step 1 as a real benchmark, almost like the MCAT. And now they're really paying more attention to the USMLE step 2. And I would say that for international students, this is vitally important that you take each of those tests, that you pass on your first attempt, and that you get the highest score possible on USMLE step 2.
Thank you.
Oh,
Perfect.
thank you.
We'll take one last quick question before I know we're going to be respectful of your time. The difference, so should a student that's applying to medical school, would it be preferred to be doing research or publishing research? Because I know that's the difference too. Like, would they rather see, like, because publishing is, it goes down the line of you having many years of experience, but some people get started into research late or just contribute but aren't published. Is there a preference?
Yeah, great question. If you are applying to medical school, do not feel you have to have publications. You don't. This is about how are you contributing? What are you learning? What is the impact you are making on that research? Anyone who is in medicine knows that publishing and research is a lot of luck, right? It's about, did you get results that are publishable? Did you get findings that you were expecting, or did it flop? Did your experiment flop? Right? So like, everyone knows that getting a publication is a process and it's not easy, and that there's a lot of luck involved in having results that are publishable, right? It's also about being in the right place at the right time, so there are many different factors. So it's about the research you are doing, what you are learning. You're learning to analyze data, you're learning to interpret data, you're learning to, look at your mistakes, and how to respond to those mistakes. There's so many, you're learning to collaborate. There's so many of the competencies that medical schools are looking for that you will demonstrate through the research process. Now, if you get to the point where you're publishing your data, you're contributing to that publication, of course there's tremendous value in that as well. But you know, the publication is sort of the icing. It's you know, it's about the process that's really what becomes more important. Now, going back to what we were discussing at the college level, college admissions officers are not as well versed in things, you know, really. So it's different at the college level, you know, but at the medical school level, it's about the process. It's about the research you're actually doing, the impact you're making, and what you're
Amazing.
gaining through that process.
Amazing response. Dr. Friedman, I learned so much and I can't imagine how much our participants learned. So thank you once again for joining in today. We want to give you a round of applause. We give all our amazing guest speakers a Zoom round of applause because we can't do it in person. So if everyone
You're
wants to
so
give
sweet.
Dr. Friedman a round of applause, that would be
It
amazing.
it was a real pleasure. And also I want you all to follow us on Instagram if that's possible. Med
Yeah.
Edits Admissions. We're also on Facebook. We also have a private Facebook group as well, which you can all join. And I'm on there quite often. So you know, we are going to be putting more out there in terms of our
That
social
would be
media.
amazing. I'll go ahead, if you can go ahead and share me those like, on an email, just
Oh.
all those links. I'll be able to
Oh,
provide it
sure. Yeah,
to
I'll
all our
email them to you.
yeah.
Mhm.
We have a Slack community of 5,300, so everyone would benefit from that.
Oh,
So
awesome.
we'll do that,
That's
and then
great.
we'll also tag you on Instagram just so people can visit you on.
Terrific.
So thank you so much again, and
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful meeting all of
Yeah.
you. Good luck. Okay, keep going. I know it's a lot of information. I tell my own kids, one step at a time. Just look at what's immediately in front of you, one step at a time. Don't look at the big, don't like know the big picture's out there, but like don't be overwhelmed by the big picture. Okay. You can do
Thank you
it.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, everyone, amazing session. Thank you guys for joining for the first hour. I'm gonna go ahead and I saw a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm sorry that we weren't able to get through everyone today. But I have some answers to some of the questions, so that's why I was like prioritizing some of the bigger main questions I feel like everyone would have. So yeah, before we do that, before I answer some of the questions, I'm gonna launch the poll. The poll is being launched right now. I'm gonna launch it. Okay, the poll is launched. I'll give a couple minutes for everyone to answer the poll. But feel free to take a couple seconds and I'll have it open for a couple minutes as well. So everyone can answer those that are on the call. If you can't see the poll, if you can't access the poll, message Rorik on Slack. That's what I recommend you to do. That is the best way to ensure that we count your attendance, even if you do not answer the poll. So if you cannot see the poll, just message Rorik, and it's the same thing as answering a poll. So try to message him sooner rather than later. I know Dr. Friedman had a lot of great points today. So if anyone has any follow-up questions for her, feel free to put them in the chat. I can do my best on answering. I am a current pre-med student in the United States. I'm not an international student, but I've gone through the experience of applying to colleges, and all of us on the executive team, Davina, she just graduated from university with the Bachelor of Science. So if you ever have any questions for her, for me, any one of our team members, feel free to ask. Feel free to just reach out to any of us on Slack. So if we will take, if you want to check if you got attendance, so if you were on the poll and you joined today's session, we have noted your attendance. We use a Zoom tracking system. So if you join the session, we'll know how long you were here for and everything. So yeah, don't worry about if you have further clarifying questions, reach out to Rorik on Slack and he will help you. Second poll will be shared in around 50 minutes for when we and again, if you choose the wrong one, no worries at all. Absolutely, we don't grade based on answer. We grade based on participation. I know some people, I'll go ahead and answer some chats before I take a few questions before we start the workshop. Let me see. I know there was. So as high school student, can we directly go to medical school without college? So I know a lot of international students have the opportunity. I know some students in Egypt I was talking to or have talked to, like you can apply directly to medical school after you finish high school. That is not the system here in the United States. Yes, you can. It's called the BSMD combined programs, and they're very competitive. To give context, I know like it's very competitive program, and a lot of students, the traditional student will not be applying BSMD. But it is an opportunity that is available. However, if you're a normal student just like me, who's going the traditional route, you have to take 4 years of undergrad before you apply to med school. And in undergrad, you're doing all your science classes. I'll talk about some of the classes in a second that you have to take, but it's like a two-step process. You go to high school, you go to college, which is your undergraduate, then you apply to medical school. That is how the process works. It is more indirect than direct for a lot of people, in my opinion. So I'll answer a couple. If anyone has any questions and they have their hand raised, please let me know. Hannah, did you have a question before I start the workshop?
Yeah, I want to know about the college. Will it just be a normal college or like the pre-med college?
Normal college is okay. So like I apply, I go to the University of Texas at Austin, and that is a normal college. It's not a medically, it has a college in natural sciences, but it's a university with multiple colleges. It's not only STEM or science focused. So that I feel like helps because you get to explore more opportunities. And this leads to my next point for a lot of students. I know I was getting messages about being a public health major and how that even relates to medicine and how, if I can get a med school. Medical school student, I'll show you I'll actually share my screen in a couple seconds. Actually should go do that. Go start doing
Like
that now.
I don't have to go to pre-med school to apply to medical college.
You have to, in America, you have to go to you have to fulfill pre-med requisites. So let me share my screen. Let me see. Okay, so today's workshop this is the workshop. Oh, here, okay. So can everyone see the screen? I'm gonna make sure it's
Yeah, genetics crash course.
Okay, yeah. So perfect. So I went ahead and I put in some of the prereqs. So for instance, this is a medical college called not medical college, it's a university called the University of Idaho. And this is their suggested pre-med coursework is to take 1 year, 1 year of general chemistry, 1 year of organic chemistry, at least 1 year of biology with lab, but you should take more. Some school requirements that you take genetics and cell biology, and we're talking about genetics today, and physics and biochemistry are some of them. However, these are the suggested pre-med courseworks. You should also be thinking and taking other classes like psychology, sociology. You should be diversifying the type of classes you take. So, for instance, for me in public health, I get to study more of how, the different social determinants of health. I get to study epidemiology. I get to study unique lenses into healthcare that aren't directly hard sciences. And you can major in anything. I have friends who major in English, who major in art sciences, who major in physical education, who major in history, government. These have nothing to do with, going to medical school, but they fulfill all of these requirements. They take all of these classes and fulfill the requirements to apply to medical school. So you can major in anything at all. And you just have to complete these requisites. And the AAMC, which is the website that Mr. Friedman just recommended, I'll put it in the chat after today's session, but that I'll put it in the Slack, but that has a list of suggested courseworks. But again, I recommend that you take more courses than hard sciences, that you explore your interests. So for instance, for me, I loved and enjoyed philosophy. So take some philosophy classes. If you're interested in, marine biology, take some marine biology classes. There's no hard, hey, you have to major in this to go to medical school. You just have to fulfill the requirements. So you can take any of these classes with any of the majors that you choose. I hope that clarifies some questions. We have many people from the waiting. I'll take one more question before we move on to the workshop. Let's see who has their hand raised. Vince. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Let me know.
Yeah, it's Beyonce, but anyways, I know it's me. I just wanted to ask, let's say I want to do my residency in the United States.
Yeah.
However, since I am from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico, even though it's not a state, it's a territory.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm a US citizenship. So, do you think it would be any different if I completed medical school in here and then I do my residency in the US? Or do you think it would be better for me to do my medical degree in the US and then the residency there too? Or it would be any, like, no difference whatsoever?
I am not Dr. Friedman, so I do not have I can not provide you with the coherent answer that you're looking for. But if you send me a message on Slack or email, I can email that over to her today and get back to you. Does that sound okay? Because I don't want to give you any wrong information. But if you're a US citizen, then I believe you can apply to any medical college in the any college in the United States. But since you're in Puerto Rico, I don't know if going to Puerto Rico like college would make you competitive to apply to medical schools in the in the contiguous United States, contiguous United States. So I'll just have to, yeah, feel free to message me on Slack, and then I'll get that question over to her, and she can definitely help out with that. Sorry, I didn't have a
All right,
direct answer. Yes.
perfect. Perfect.
I'll take one more question from Rokia, and then we'll go over to.
Yeah, I really wanted to ask about the research papers
Yeah,
because as a high schooler, I don't know from where can I start.
yeah.
I don't know actually. Dr. Jessica said that we should have experiences with research papers. How could I start with this?
So research papers, this is an amazing segue into Friday's lecture. So Friday, we're talking about how do you gain research experience. We're going to launch our research symposium here at Med Empowered, where you can use to gain research skills. So I'm going to hold off on that question, and I'll let you know that you'll have an answer if you join on Friday this time. We will provide you with clear, next steps on how to find research, clinical experience, etc. Okay. And then we'll contact, if you want to contact Dr. Jessica, we'll provide her contact information, her blog, and her services to you all today after the session closes. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. It's time goes like this. So I want to make sure that we get through some of the content for today's workshop. So today we are going to talk about genetics, and genetics is a fascinating field. Genetics is the study of genes. I'm going to try to talk slowly. I know a lot of individuals want me to make sure that I am comprehensible, and so please let me know if I'm going too fast. I will try my absolute best to ensure that I talk in a calm manner. And if anyone has any questions, just let me know. So genetics is the field of the study of genes and how information is carried through the biological code. The biological code is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And this forms up our genetic code. It is what we have that, transfers our information. It's what we're made up of. And it is included in it's included in every cell in our body, our DNA. It pretty much codes for protein, that codes for different, the code for tissues, it codes for different enzymes, and it codes for our various metabolic processes. So it's very it's very, very important, DNA, and understanding it. I took a class on this my third semester of undergraduate, and again, this is a pre-med requirement. One of the requirements is to take a genetics class and understanding genetics because it's so important. So today we're going to walk through some of the key discoveries. We might not get through all the discoveries of DNA, but we'll talk through some of the main ones. We'll talk about the structure of DNA. We'll talk about how it is replicated, and we'll talk about how you go from transcription to translation and how a gene becomes a protein. And if we get to it, we will be able to talk, we'll talk about gene expression and regulation. So don't have I can see, I know everyone's looking for the slides. I do not, this is a little different than the one that I have access to because I created some notes on here, but let me see if I can send you let me see if I can share here. Let me just do that. So this is like, I have some notes here, but this is the slide in English. The Arabic translation service will be available after today's session for this workshop, but we're gonna just go through, we're gonna go through this now. So yeah, so we'll just go through this, and the poll has already been sent. Again, I'm gonna answer all poll questions after the workshop, but yeah, feel free to use that link as a way to access the workshop. Yeah, my notes are a little different because I want to do more hands-on, because genetics, in my opinion, is much more visual, and you need to be able to understand it. So I like to draw on my notes when I teach this topic, just because it's how I like to teach it. So talked about this. So inside our cell, we have multiple cells, and our cells are in the nucleus of our cells. We have chromosomes and chromatin that can be made supercoiled into chromosomes. And what it consists of is DNA. DNA is, again, deoxyribonucleic acids, and each of the DNA particles have information that have different genes that code for different traits and are responsible for various expressions within our body. So DNA, again, this is the molecule DNA, and then part of the DNA is a segment called a gene. So gene is a specific segment of DNA, and a gene can represent, for instance, eye color. It can be, how much of a specific hormone is produced. It can, be related to a type of cancer. It's very, very complicated. It's a very complicated system, and we can't get into the nitty-gritty details of all of it today. Genetics is a fascinating field, so I encourage you guys to explore the topic. But each gene, again, the variation, so we talked about, so we have DNAs, and within DNAs, we have specific portions of a DNA that are called, or segments that are called DNA. And then within the DNA, we have different alleles. Alleles are practically just a variation of a gene. And there are different types of alleles. So you could have a dominant allele. So you get two types of alleles for a different trait. For instance, a dominant or a recessive trait allele. For instance, hair color. I have black hair. My parents have black hair. Both parents have black hair. So I assume that both of their genotypes, well, possibly could be, my genotype is, brown hair dominant, or recessive, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive. The terms can get very confusing in genetics, so I encourage you guys to ask questions if you have any. But this, I think, once you understand the language of genetics and how it all works, it makes much more sense than having when you explain it, when you try and engage with this topic. So we'll send some resources post session, and if anyone has questions, let me know. So we'll have alleles that are different variations of genes, and allele, again, they apply to the different colors / different traits that are represented. So for instance, homozygous dominant for this flower leads for the color is purple. So here we know that big B is dominant, and usually the purple allele here is the dominant allele because it's capital letter. A lot of times in genetics, capital letters mean that a trait is, or allele is, dominant, and lowercase means it's recessive. That's just something that you have to kind of get down in understanding. And then when something is lowercase here, this is the white allele. As we see both are lowercase, that means it's homozygous recessive. Homozygous just means the same. So here we have the same type of allele for both, and here as well. These are both homozygous. And then dominant is whenever you have the dominant trait, and recessive is when you have the recessive trait. Heterozygous individuals have both an allele for the dominant trait and the recessive trait. So that's how we know which is dominant. So when we have two of these alleles together, purple shows. And that tells you that the purple allele is dominant compared to the white allele. And that helps you understand which is recessive and which is dominant. And this was done through a series of breeding experiments. We'll get into some of Mendel's laws in a minute. But again, that is some of the basics in terminology, and understanding it is vital in understanding genetics. So just to reiterate some of the main points, humans get two copies of each gene, one copy from each parent. So if I have hair color, I'm not going to get both of my alleles for a particular gene for hair color from one parent. It's going to be from both parent. So this is a law that we'll talk about in a minute, but we'll get one allele from each parent. And then these two copies do not need to be identical. As we saw here, this allele is capital B and this is lowercase b. This is purple allele, white allele. They don't have to be identical. You can have two different alleles, but the dominant is the one that will show. The dominant will the one that will dictate. Each variation of a gene is called an allele. We just talked about that. So the variations, different colors, different types, different patterns are known as alleles. And a really big point of what leads to diversity within the human population, how like no one is ever the same, is because there's so many billions of combinations of different alleles that can occur, that it just leads to diversity. That's one of the reasons it's fascinating. If another important thing is if a gene contains information for eye color, one may code for blue eyes and one might code for brown eyes. That's just an example. So if you have an allele, for instance, capital A is brown eyes and lowercase is blue eyes, this contains the information. And this capital A will code for blue eyes, lowercase will, the capital A in this circumstance is brown and lowercase is blue. So that just shows you that you can have different alleles for different genes. That's the main takeaway. It can get confusing, I know. So again, make sure we stay unmuted. Thank you so much. So yeah, important key takeaways: understanding genes, how alleles are variations of genes, and how that leads to diversity is some of the key points, in my opinion, that you have to understand some of the basics of genetics. So now let's talk about some of the history of DNA and some of the key takeaways. So again, a lot of this was research. I know a lot of individuals were interested in research, but these key takeaways were all from various research studies. So it's important that you understand that research is how you change the world. And we wouldn't have our understanding of DNA if we didn't have the research to back it up and prove it. So we'll talk about some of the key players and discoveries and Mendel, his laws, as well as some other key takeaways. So Mendel, he was the plant guy. I know everyone knows him for, he proposed the ideas of genes by using various plant experiments and breeding plants. And he was able to establish the principles of heredity, which is what is called the Mendel's law, which is law of segregation and law of independent assortment. So what we can see here is two plants were breeded, a purple plant and a white plant. And in the first generation, 100% of plants are purple. So we're like, okay, oh great. So where did the white go? Oh, we might be like, okay, the white is recessive and the purple is dominant, and that's where it shows, and that's how it works. The purple will always dominate. So what you think will happen is when two purple plants breed again within the same generation, that it will also create all purple plants. That's what makes sense, right? Because a purple plant will, inevitably create a purple plant. But no, there's a ratio that was determined that for every 4 plants, one of the plants was going to be white. So Mendel questioned, how did the parental generation and the second generation, how did, from pretty much a generation later, how did this white come to be? And he was able to kind of question this and, think about that there's some sort of traits that are passing down. There's some sort of characteristics that the white allele is being passed down across generations and showing up in some generations. So that is important to understand because it explains how molecular inheritance is important, because it allows you to understand future predictions as well. So through this experiment from Mendel was able to explain the law of segregation and law of independent assortment. The law of segregation, again, I think kind of already explained this, that each individual has 2 alleles and 1 from each parent. And during the formation of gametes, each gamete carries 1 allele from each gene from 1 parent. So, and how this occurs is random. So for instance, if your genotype is the way your genes are organized, and phenotype is how they're expressed visually. if you have a heterozygous for eye color, for example, you can either give the brown eye if capital A is blue brown eye and lowercase a if it's blue eye. You can either give a capital A or lowercase a, and you can give either. You don't have to. It doesn't. The dominant allele can be passed down, but the recessive can be also passed down. So that's interesting to know that if I have brown hair, I can also, if I, for instance, in my alleles, for example, I have the allele for brown hair, I can pass down that as well. So dominance does not affect what you can inherit, what types of alleles you can. If you're dominant for a certain trait, doesn't mean you can only dominate. You can only pass on that dominant allele. You can also pass on the recessive allele, and each parent gives one of their alleles to their next generation. So, for instance, and we'll talk about law of independent assortment. You can, if this was one parent and this was another, you could either give a capital A, you can give capital A, lowercase a. It does not, the order does not matter. It's random. The next important thing to understand, the next important, law that Mendel proposed was a law of independent assortment. And that means pretty much that alleles of different genes assort independently. So, for instance, if you P color and shape, if you have a certain allele that you're passing down for P color, it does not influence in any way what the shape is. So it just it talks about how this law says that alleles for genes are segregated independently, and that one does not influence the other. So if I have capital A for instance for P color, and I get the dominant trait, I can either get the dominant or the recessive allele for my shape, for the shape that for this P plant. So it does not want, if you get the dominant for one, it does not mean you can get the dominant for the other. So it's pretty much a probability game here. However, there are limitations to this. And if you study more advanced genetics, you'll hear about unlinked versus linked genes and how when genes are linked, they can travel together. So sometimes again, on the loci, if you've seen a gene, if they are very, very, very close together, if two genes are very close together, two alleles, if they're linked in a way, they can travel together. And that is really cool and fascinating to understand. And we're not going to get into the details of linked versus unlinkage. Linkage is a very, very, I think, one of the most difficult topics in genetics to understand and comprehend. But if you have any questions, if you do a reading and you have questions, feel free to ask us on Slack. But yeah, linkage is cool. Another experiment was by Griffith, and he pretty much proposed and showed that DNA can be transferred, and known as this process called transformation. So in this experiment, we have living S cells, virulent cells injected into, virulent cells are cells that cause death that are injected into this mouse and it dies. And then for another, we have living R cells, which are avirulent, which is not deadly, and we insert it into another mouse and the mouse is healthy. This makes sense. These are control groups. And then when you kill the S cells, which is the dangerous cells that kill the mouse is healthy. So heat can kill certain genes. Heat is, a way that you can kill enzymes as well. So heat it kills this bad S cell, these S cells, and you're able to develop a healthy mouse. Now, if we provide a mixture of heat-killed S cells, which is the control part of the heat-killed, so the one that allowed allow the mouses to stay alive and healthy by the heat-killed S cells, but you also mix in R cells, which are the living R cells, which are the avirulent type. For some reason, the mouse dies, and it creates the living S cells. So this is, again, you probably have to look at this experiment a couple of times to kind of gauge what's going on, but it kind of shows that DNA can be transferred from various mixtures and cells, and it led to the idea of transformation. Oh, this, again, is also very important. It's the Avery experiments, McCarty and MacLeod experiments, and they are pretty much, what they found was a transforming principle that led to certain characteristics in this experiment, in the Griffith experiment, was due to DNA and not RNA, proteins, lipase, or carb, all those different enzymes. It was not due to those, it was due to DNA. If you want to talk about the specifics of the experiment, the experimental design, how it was run, then we can also feel free to reach out on Slack, just because that's much more advanced information than today's topic. We'll skip some of this. Today, we're trying to Hershey and Chase experiments, I'll leave those again for you to self-identify just because of time. But Chargaff also, he was able to show and determine the amount of each of the different purines and pyrimidines. Adenine goes to thymine, and thymine goes to cytosine goes to guanine, and how they're paired and linked together. So this is we'll get into a practice question, and if anyone wants to, feel free to rate. Well, I'll take chat questions because I know that it's easier. But so pretty much, I'll explain this a little better. The amount of adenine that you have equals the amount of thymine. So for instance, if you had 22% of adenine, the amount of thymine that you will have also will be 22. You can use this information to calculate cytosine and guanine to make a total of 100%. So we'll talk about this in a second, by my practice example, but we'll do this. So if a DNA sample has 33% adenine, how much thymine will it have? Based on what we just talked about, exactly 33%. Now, if a DNA sample has 33% adenine, how much guanine does it have? This is a little more tricky. And 17, perfect. Exactly, it's 17%. So I see a lot of different answers. But how we calculated that was, we know adenine equals thymine, and we know we have 33% and 33%, total of 66% adenine and thymine. Now the remaining that we have is between cytosine and guanine. And we have to have two equal numbers that equal 100%, but have to be split equally between cytosine and guanine. And then when you do the math, you know that it's going to be 17% for cytosine and guanine to equal the amount to equal 100. That can be a little confusing, but if you have any questions, I'll look at the chat right now, but I think everyone is starting to get a better understanding. 17 exactly. So yeah, it's 34 total. Did I do that right? Yes. But you have to divide it into 2. So yeah. Well, if you need more practice examples, let us know. We'll be able to provide that. Let me make sure. Yes. Okay. So 22, I don't see where you're getting 22 from, but if you feel free to stay after the call, and we can talk about where you're getting this 22 number from. So I don't know much about, I know Mendel's experiments were like very important in developing some of the principles of genetics, like the law of segregation, law of independent assortment. He is known, especially in we were taught from the curriculum that I learned, that he kind of was the father of genetics. He allowed us to understand some of the basic principles that led to our understanding of genetics today, but don't think he is a failure. So yeah, science is amazing. So, various experiments can have different impacts, but any progress in science, I think, is impactful, even if it's not any grand experiments or anything that we think, like between flowers, how does it relate to humans? Well, it allowed us to understand the molecular inheritance pattern. So it's really important to be able to do that. I have 18 people in the waiting room, I need to admit. But yeah, so take a couple seconds to breathe in, take in the information if any of that was confusing. And then the next historical achievement, in my opinion, is Watson and Crick experiment. And they were able to kind of able to explain purines versus pyrimidines and how those relate. Make sure you have our mics muted if possible. Here, okay, I'll move. So, with Watson's and Crick's, their model, they used Rosalind Franklin's discovery of the anti-parallel structure of the backbones of DNA and how DNA is constructed to be able to, come up with their model. And there are other experiments that were done to show that DNA was a semi-conservative model, not either conservative or dispersive. So pretty much what this model shows is when you replicate DNA, the new DNA consists of one original strand and one parent strand. And the other models explain that in various different ways. We won't get into that today just because of time. So the semi-conservative model was the one that was deemed correct based on an experiment that was done by Meslin and Stahl, where they did they spun various different weights of nitrogen and were able to determine that DNA replication is semi-conservative. So if you have questions about this experiment, don't know a lot of specific details about this, but reach out to us on Slack and then we can definitely guide you through this. But we wanted to provide you of how each topic led to another and how experiments kind of showed the answer to some of these questions. But yes, justice for Rosalind Franklin. She was the one who discovered a lot of the science and she did not win that Nobel Peace Prize in Science, which was really, really sad. Yeah, so again, DNA. So when I talk about semi-conservative replication, I'm pretty much saying this. So if this is the original template of DNA, in your new DNA molecule, you're going to have one new strand and one new strand and one old strand as part of your as part of the new DNA that's created. So type these letters into the chat as fast as you can. I'm gonna scroll to the next slide in 3, 2, 1. As fast as you can, type it in the chat. Okay, Jason's really fast. Okay, I see everyone is starting to do it, but you guys aren't as fast as DNA replication in our bodies. Our cells copy 5 billion nucleotide pairs in just a few hours. So we didn't even get close to 0.0000001% of what our body can do in terms of DNA replication. But this just goes to show how complicated and how amazing, in my opinion, the process is, and how DNA replication is, is fascinating. So when I talk about DNA replication, when I was learning this initially in middle school and high school, before I came to college, one thing that really always confused me was DNA replication, translation, and transcription. So those three seem like they're simultaneous, but DNA replication happens during interphase, and it's what causes our DNA to replicate in our cells. So our cells replicate thousands of times a day to create new cells, skin cells, and for this, DNA has to be replicated. Oh, I'm sorry, I think you can remove the transcription thing. So yeah, DNA replication. So for your cells to make proteins, DNA is replicated. So that's the genetic code. That's the cells. After DNA replication has occurred, and you have the next step is translation and transcription. And translation and transcription is what makes proteins to be made, and that what makes up a lot of our body processes and makes up the different amino acids our body needs to function. That is important to know. DNA replication, translation, transcription are different things. Do not get them confused because it will drive you crazy. We'll talk about DNA replication today, and I hope I can introduce the central dogma. Central dogma is transcription and translation and all that. So I'll try my best to get to that, but make sure that we read this. I'm sorry. Okay, if any questions or anything, feel free to leave to the end of the chat, but I'm trying to make sure that we can finish without having disruption. Okay. Thank you for staying. We'll take questions at the end. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. If just letting you know that we do track if you are just unmuted and muting just to, create, just to let you know, make sure that we're not staying on mute during the session, any presentation. It just helps us out. Thank you so much. So data replication. So the first part of data replication, it's important to know that eukaryotes, multicellular organisms versus single cellular organisms have different. Okay. Okay. I went ahead and removed the person that was unmuting and making noise. I apologize for that. Yeah, we did remove the person from the Zoom. Make sure everyone joined. I apologize again, everyone. I just want to make sure that we don't have people unmuting. But yeah, if we can keep on mute, that's amazing. But I went ahead and removed that individual, so we should be good for the rest of the lecture. So replication in eukaryotes and prokaryotes are two different things. So in eukaryotes, the main, I think, in my opinion, what you need to take out of today is knowing that in eukaryotes, there are multiple origins of replications for DNA replication to occur. And in prokaryotes, there's usually only one site of replication. That is, I think, the key takeaway in understanding the differences between those two. That DNA, there's multiple origins of replication happening simultaneously, and while for prokaryotes, there's only one origin of replication. So to get into the nitty gritty of this, I'm going to try to take this slow, and I'm opening some of the notes so I make sure I get through everything. Okay, so initiation of DNA replication is, so what starts this process is that there are enzymes. So anytime you see an ACE in biology, 99% of the time it's some sort of enzyme. So that's good to know. Yes, you're going to have a link to the presentation. So topoisomerase, helicase, and SSBs, they initiate the process of of DNA replication. See, I told you. You can mix up the terms really fast. So for DNA replication, helicase, SSBs, which is single-stranded binding proteins, and topoisomerase work together to open up the sphere of the origin of replication for DNA replication to occur. So helicase, this enzyme right here, it unzips this double strand, and topoisomerase, because you know how DNA is like intertwined, it's 3D, it's very cool. Topoisomerase is unwinding these strands to make it easy for helicase to cut through. And then the single-stranding binding proteins, the SSBs, are pulling everything apart and making sure that they're pulled apart. So it's a simultaneous, cohesive effect that occurs to ensure that, everything is done in a proper order. Helicase, single-stranded binding proteins, topoisomerase work together to ensure that whenever DNA polymerase comes in a couple minutes, we'll talk about it, that it's very easy for it to transcribe, for it to replicate the DNA without any issues. And I think the accuracy rate for this whole process for DNA replication is actually insane. Barely any mistakes happen because of how amazing and how coordinated the system is. Talk to me about how amazing biology is. Elongation. So what is going on is DNA polymerase is going to catalyze this new DNA, but for it to catalyze, it needs a short RNA primer. So RNA primer is just a single-stranded molecule instead of a double-stranded DNA molecule. It's going to use this primer to initiate the process of replication. And that is going to be kind of a template for DNA to kind of polymerase to start replicating. But, RNA primer is needed for DNA polymerase to even start to begin to replicate. Very important to know. And also it's extremely, extremely important to know that DNA polymerase can only work in the 5' to 3'. I'm sorry, you guys want to make sure that we stay on mute. If anyone is unmuting and that was unallowed, we'll remove you from this, and that will affect your attendance. So please make sure that you stay on mute 100 until you are until we allow for questions. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the chat just for now because people are getting just a little annoyed with the spam. So we'll make sure that we'll again answer questions at the end. We'll conclude in a little bit. So again, elongation is whenever DNA polymerase is RNA is put down and DNA is going to be used to kind of elongate and replicate the DNA. Again, DNA can only work in the 5' to 3' direction. And this is confused. This can lead to some confusion because there are two strands that have to be replicated. You know how we're talking about the semi-conservative model? This is a really good way to see it. So here we have the original parent strand, and then we have on both ends the new strand being constructed, the semi-conservative model. Here, you can see it. For this, again, we have our different enzymes working together to make sure that the DNA is, that everything is separated, that the DNA polymerase can work. Once the RNA primer is set down, which is this thing right here, DNA polymerase goes in and adds those nucleotides. The leading strand is the easy strand. So pretty much it just moves, again, it only works in a 5' to 3' direction. So that's also important to understand in genetics is the directions of DNA. And we can ask questions later, but I expect that most individuals have a basic understanding of 5' and 3'. So if this is 3', the only way that you can start DNA polymerase to start is on the 5' end. So once the RNA primer is put down on the 3' end of the original DNA strand, and the 5' end is where the primer is put down, DNA polymerase adds the nucleotides to start constructing the replication process. For the leading strand, is very easy to do this because you're working in one direction, and as the fork opens, it's always going to be 3' this end, and this is always going to be 5' or 3'. So it's always going to be very easy. But what leads to a problem is the other end. So on this end of the DNA replication of the base pairs, you have the RNA primer working against the fork's movement, causing gaps to occur, fragments. These are called Okazaki fragments. So the primer puts down the RNA primer, and as DNA works in again only the 5' or 3' direction, it's going to be working this way, and this is away from the replication fork. And when this happens, you lead to fragments because there's going to be a lag. So this is the RNA primer, and this is the DNA. As it moves forward, there's a lag. Again, this is very easy. It's going very, very fast. But as the helicase opens it, and this is the 5' to 3' direction, there's going to be a lag as it's moving in the opposite direction. So that gets a bit confusing, but that's just part of the process for DNA replication. And understanding the Okazaki fragments, we'll have some resources linked for you guys later. But understanding how this works is very, very important. The Okazaki fragments, and then later, a different DNA polymerase comes and it takes away the RNA primer, puts down a DNA primer, a DNA molecule, and then ligase comes, which is the glue, and attaches everything together. So it's a simultaneous strand, just like the leading strand. You think this could lead, again, to thousands of mistakes, just because, seems very complicated. But again, it's a very coordinated system, and there aren't much mistakes that occur. So let's match the enzyme. Let's try and reflect on what we just learned and talk through some of these terms. So ligase. I'll open up the chat now, but ligase. What do we think ligase is? What does it do? We just talked about it like 20 seconds ago. So ligase, it joins Okazaki fragments together. So again, there's fragments here, as we can see here, that occur. These are these fragments that occur as the DNA polymerase moves and the primers. There's small fragments that occurs, as you can see here. These are the fragments that occur. DNA, what's called ligase, just glues it together to make it one simultaneous strand. The second one is topoisomerase. We talked about that's an enzyme we talked about a couple minutes ago. Oh, I gave you the answer. It's 4. Yes, I'm sorry. Topoisomerase is 4. So it relieves, so how DNA is intertwined, it releases that pressure. So it relieves the overwinding strand. And then DNA polymerase 3. What does it do? I keep going ahead. I'm sorry, y'all. DNA polymerase 3. What is the function of DNA polymerase 3? Exactly. Just like DNA polymerase 3, it's 3. It adds nucleotides to the 3' end of the growing strand. And what direction can DNA polymerase work in? What direction? What direction? So is it 5' to 3' or 3' to 5'? 5 to 3. Perfect. And then primase, what does that do? I see 1, I see 5. So primase is they make up the short. So before DNA polymerase can come, the RNA polymerase has to put down the strands. So it makes a short fragment of RNA molecules. And then the last one is the single-stranded binding proteins. What do they do? Perfect. It breaks the hydrogen bonds between nucleotides. So yeah, how the different nucleotides are connected together is there's hydrogen bonds, and that's just the anatomy of how the different pyrines, pyrimidines, they connect is through hydrogen bonds, which are very, very strong bonds. If you didn't know that already. We'll talk about again, telomeres are also really important because they are what leads to DNA shortening of our chromosomes. I won't get into the details today, but they're usually sequences at the top and bottom of DNA molecules and chromosomes. But feel free to look at that when I share the slides after the session. Talked about genes. The next, I think, very important thing that I wanted you guys to we learn about. So we learned about DNA replication. This is separate from a process called transcription and translation. This transcription and translation is how we make genes to go to proteins. DNA replication is how we just replicate our DNA. And I want to make sure that we understand those 3 differences today, because I promise you, if you can understand that, your life will be so easy whenever you're studying for any, because this is really, you'll learn this throughout your whole career if you go into medicine and academia. It's very, very important. So central dogma pretty much says that when you have a DNA molecule, it's to create the gene, to create a specific protein. The first step is transcription. And this is whenever an mRNA molecule is created using a gene of interest. So if this specific gene is for instance, if this is eye color and we want to make the protein for eye color, we'll use this protein to transcribe it using RNA instead of DNA molecules. So we'll just transcribe it. So for instance, A will be adenine instead of thymine, it'll be uracil, cytosine will be guanine, cytosine will be guanine. We'll practice some of this in a couple seconds. But it's an mRNA transcript. And once the transcript has been created, we create something called a pre-mRNA. And then it goes through a series of splicings and exons and introns. If you've heard those terms, cool. If you haven't, no worries. But it goes through a series of processing that leads to an mRNA molecule being created. And this leaves the nucleus, goes to a ribosome, and then it's created into a protein. So yeah, as we can see here, we have this is the mRNA, the messenger RNA that was received from the nucleus. This, again, a tRNA in the ribosome will connect it to a protein. And now you have your peptide chain. You have proteins being made. Very simple version of the very complicated process that is translation. But how we get this protein, how things are coded for instance, how do I know that AAA or UUU or CUA or GAU, what it codes for? Is we understand the codon chart. And this is, again, if you study genetics, you'll use this pretty much for when you learn about this topic. And you can see what different codes code for what protein. And this is very cool because this chart is, again, it allows you to see what proteins can be made. It's really important to understand for this that no codon will specify for two different amino acids. So the genetic code is redundant and is not unambiguous. So each codon here, each codon will specify for will not specify for two different amino acids. However, different codons can have different amino acids. So for instance, UAU will always be tyrannosine, but UAU will never be anything else but tyrannosine. However, UAC and UAU both code for tyrannosine. So that is a good understanding of the codon chart. So that is so much information in 1 hour. I probably learned this over the span of 3 or 4 weeks. So I know probably didn't get into as much detail, but I wanted to give you kind of the bigger picture of genetics. So hopefully, get your brains thinking about some of these topics. But I'll send some of the, I know it's getting on time and we have to close the session soon, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of you all's time, but I'm going to launch the last poll today. And so give me 1 second to do that. Let's see. Let's see what question I want to ask. Okay, I'm launching the last poll, and then I'll stick around for a couple minutes for questions, and then post session today, I'll send this workshop to you all for you guys to look into more detail, because we have a ton of content made for you all, talking about more details into transcription. But I wanted to give you guys, just because of time, just a basic kind of overview. Let me shop my screen share. And send this poll out. Okay, sending a poll right now. Do you need RNA primer for DNA replication? So poll is out. After the poll, if you do not have any questions, feel free to leave. But want to make sure that Friday is our last session. So we're really excited to end off this year's summer program. If you can't see the poll, please message Warwick, and he will need at least 24 to 48 hours to get back to you. Also really important that if you have any questions for today's topic, ask on Slack. Stay after the chat, so we can hang out for a little bit, and I can help answer as many questions as I have time for. The poll is already sent out, and if you can't see it, you need to message Warwick on Slack. And this session is also